Hello, my name is LoG and welcome to another edition of LoG Tracks. In the lesson for this track, we will talk about a very common chord type that is used all the time in all genres of music, a chord type that I call a setup chord. Let's first listen to what this track sounds like. In this lesson, we will talk about these setup chords and how they work in music, as well as how you can think about and play them in the associated backing track. Feel free to skip ahead to the different parts of the lesson in the description below, and as usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the other link below. If you'd rather not hear me talk about anything for 45 minutes, feel free to jump ahead to the backing track at the link above or below in the description. Let's now get on to the lesson. In music, there are generally two types of roles or classes that a chord could fall into. The first type is a chord that sounds good. It sounds satisfying to listen to. It sounds pleasant. These chords are usually major or all of those variations, so major, major 7, major 9, major add 9, major 6, etc., or minor and all of those variations, so minor, minor 7, minor add 9, minor 9, minor 11, etc. Once again, these chords are satisfying to listen to. We can just kind of sit on them and they sound good. I call these chords target chords because as we listen to music, our ears are constantly looking for these pleasant, satisfying sounds. We are targeting these sounds with our ears whenever we're listening to music. The other type of chord that you'll find is a chord that doesn't necessarily sound pleasant. It doesn't necessarily sound satisfying, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily sound good. These chords are used to make your ears want to hear something else, to make your ears want to hear the next chord, to build anticipation, to build a desire to hear that next sound. I call these chords setup chords because that's exactly what they do. They set up the next chord that's about to happen. They make your ears want to hear that next sound. And oftentimes what that next sound is a target chord. So it's this constant back and forth between setup chords and target chords that make those target chords sound more satisfying. So for example, if you have a target chord and you move right to another target chord, nothing wrong with that. It's going to sound good, but it might sound, a little homogeneous, a little flat, a little passive sounding. But if you take target chord and then a setup chord, which will build your ears into that next target chord, that next target chord will sound more satisfying because your ears have a desire to hear it. It's kind of like if you watch a TV show and you see an episode and that episode ends very finished, very satisfying, very pleasant. There's not really a real reason for you to want to watch the next episode because you're already satisfied. But that's not what TV shows do. What do? They end with a plot twist or something new that happened, a new character, a new development, or a cliffhanger or something. That is the setup into the next episode. Why do people do that? Because they want you to see the next episode note, so they make more money. This is the musical equivalent of that. We have chords that are constantly building our ears into other sections of the song, into other chords, etc. It builds anticipation. It makes us want to hear the next sound. It is setting up that next sound. In this lesson, we're going to talk about one of the most common types of setup chords, as well as the type of setup chord that's pretty much the foundation for all other types of setup chords. These chords I call 5/ofs. So the first thing we need to figure out is how to make our ears want to hear something else, want to hear the next sound. The easiest way to do this is by moving into a sound by half step. So for example, if I play this C note right here, if I just played a whole bunch, let your ears get used to it, and then I move back a fret, and then move back into the C, that C is probably a little bit more satisfying to hear the second time around because I'm moving away from it, but I'm not going very far. Our ears hear that note, the note right behind C, which is B in this case, as very, very close to the note that we're familiar with, but it's not exact. So when we play that note a bunch and then eventually move back into the original note, the C, again, that note is a little bit more satisfying. So I'm going to do that same thing now, but instead of doing it with just the C note, I'm going to do it with a C chord. Okay, so it's going to be like this. I'll play this voicing for this demonstration. So now I have a C chord, and I'm going to get into this chord by simply playing that single B note, which again is right behind the root of the chord, the C. It's the 7 of the key, and it's going to eventually move back up 1 fret to the root of the chord. So here's the C chord. Now watch this, that single note. Now move back up to the C. Notice a little bit more satisfying when I hit that eventual C chord that I'm moving towards, my target chord. So this single note is setting up that C chord, the target chord. So let's strengthen this sound a little bit more. Instead of playing a single note, just the B, how about I play a chord with that note in it? Well, the most common chord that you'll find in a key that's going to contain the 7 of the key is the 5 chord. And in this case, we're in the key of C. We're kind of temporarily doing this in the key of C. The 5 chord is G. I'm going to play it with this voicing so you can really hear that note. Check it out. You can hear that note on the top of the G chord. That's that same B, the 7 of the key. But in G, inside of the chord, it's the 3rd of the chord, right? G, A, B, 1, 2, 3 of the G chord, but 7 of the whole key. So now if I play the C chord, then play the G chord, and then eventually go back to the C chord, that C chord again is a little bit more satisfying because we are setting it up with its 5, in this case G. So if I play a normal progression like C, F, G, I'll try that. So C, F, here comes the G, and if I just stop like that, it's probably not that satisfying because you heard that chord and you probably want to hear it eventually move back to the C because it contains that note that is a half step away from the root of the C chord. So now let me play the whole thing and resolve eventually heading back to the C. Here's the C, F, G, and then C. Notice that C is a lot more satisfying to hear because we're playing it with its setup chord G right before. So what is this concept? We are emphasizing or setting up the 1 chord, our target chord, by playing its 5 right before. So you can do this to any chord, any 1 chord that you have. If your 1 chord is A, that's your target chord, you'll play its 5 right before. Now you might be saying, well, I don't know what that is. I don't know what A's 5 is. I don't know what F sharp's 5 is or what F's 5 is. I don't know that stuff. That's okay. On the guitar, really, really easy trick to find this. Let's say we want to play the 5 of A. We want to set up A by playing its 5 chord. Here's A. If you want to find the 5, go up a power chord. That's always going to be the 5. So I look at A, go up a power chord, whatever note this is, which is E in this case, play the chord bass off that, the major chord, and that will eventually set up the A. Notice it has that same half step move. The 7 of the A eventually leading to the root of the A. It moves the exact same way as the G did to the C. And it will always work like that. Again, what are we doing? Our target chord is the 1 chord, and the setup chord is its 5. How do we find that chord? You look at your target chord, the 1 chord in this case, go up a power chord, whatever note that is, that's the 5 of the chord. You play the major chord right there, and you're good to go. So now let's move this forward again. What do? We originally found this sound by moving half step. So what happens if we maybe look for another instance of half step movement? So we have 2 instances of half step movement. How do we do that? Well, in a key, there are 2 naturally existing half step motions, right? We have the 7 to the 1. So here's my C major scale. That's 7 to 1. That's the one that we've been doing, right? Now, what's the other half step movement? The other half step movement is 3 to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a half step right there. So fortunately for us, the 3 is in the C chord. There it is. It's part of our target chord. It's part of the 1 chord. And notice the note right next to it, the 4. So maybe we can get into that 3 by moving from the 4, similar to like what we did when we had the 7 up to the 1. So now let's see what happens if we have both of those notes. Not just the 7 to the 1, but also now the 4 to the 3. I'm going to play just those 2 notes and then resolve. Notice what happens. We have 2 notes moving not only by half step, but in different directions. We have the top note moving up a half step, and we have the bottom note moving down a half step. Okay, so we have 2 different notes moving like that in different directions, both moving by half steps, and the interval that is created when we play the 4 and the 7 is an interval called a tritone. Okay, this tritone is an innately dissonant sound no matter how you play it. No matter where I play that, it will always be slightly dissonant. So we have 3 strong factors going on right there. We have 2 instances of half steps moving. They're moving in different directions, and we're coming from, when we play both of those notes together, we're coming from an innately dissonant sound moving to a normal sound. So watch as I play just these 2 notes, and then eventually move to our target chord, the C chord. There are those 2, and then here's the C. Here's the C, played a couple times. Here are those 2 half-step notes, the 4 and the 7, and eventually resolving to the C. So now let's take that another step forward. We're going to take, instead of just this note in the G chord, we're going to add in that note that we just found, the 4 of the key, which is right here. So here's the normal G chord, right? 1, that's the root, that's the 5, that's the root, that's the 3rd, moving to the C, right? Very normal. Now I'm going to add in that new note that I just found. That note, 4 of the key, is F, right? So you'd say, well, what note is this of G? Here's the G chord. What is that note of G? If that's my 1 of G, that is flat 7, because if that's 1, that's normal 7 as it always is, and then back 1 more fret is flat 7. So we have a major chord, G major, with a flat 7. Let's see what that sounds like. Here's the normal G, 5 moving to 1. Here's now the G with the flat 7, that new note, 4 of the key, resolving to the C. It's a little stronger, right? Here's the normal G to the C. Here's the other one. It's stronger because, again, we have multiple instances of half-step motion. They're moving in different directions, and the interval that's created between the 2 of them is naturally or innately dissonant. Now you might be saying, okay, a major chord, G major with a flat 7. What is that chord? This is called a dominant 7th, okay? A major chord with a flat 7. On the 5 chord, which is what we're playing, that is the only time in any key that sound naturally exists. The only place where a dominant 7th chord naturally exists is on the 5 of the key. So if we're in the key of C, that would be G dominant 7th, okay? Exactly the same as what we talked about earlier. If you want to do this to any chord, all you do is you find your target chord. So let's say A, go up a power chord. That's going to be where you'll play not just the major chord, but now the dominant 7th, and it will give you that same sound. So here's A, our target chord, let's say new key. And then here's the E7 setting up the A. One more time. E7, the 5, setting up the A. Back to the A. Notice that pull is exactly the same. Let's try a totally different chord. How about F sharp, right? That's our 1. Where's the 5? Up a power chord. C sharp, right? C sharp dominant 7th will set up the F sharp. Play a little better. One more time. The 5 chord to the 1. Right, so what's the concept? If you have a 1 chord and you want to set it up, all you do, play its 5 chord as a dominant 7th, which will have a bunch of notes naturally moving by half step into your target chord, setting up the chord, making you want to hear that next target chord. So now, great, we've got a way to move to the 1 chord, but what happens if we want to set up a chord that's not a 1 chord? Maybe we want to set up a 2 chord or a 6 chord or a 4 chord or something like that. Well, guess what? This exact same concept will work. All we need to do is, instead of playing the 5 of the 1 chord, we'll play the 5 of the 6 chord, the 5 of the 2 chord, 5 of the 4 chord in the exact same way. So let's say our target chord is a 6 chord instead of a 1 chord like we did earlier. So let's do this in the key of C, same key. So here's my 1 chord. What's the 6 chord of the key of C? Well, C, D, E, F, G, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the root of the 6 chord, A. And 6 chords are generally minor. So our 6 chord in this key is A minor. I want to set up this chord. How am I going to do that? Exactly the same as what I did before. Find its 5, and on its 5, play major, or if I want it stronger, dominant 7th. Where's its 5? Go up a power chord. If that's our root for the target chord, that's the root for the setup chord, the 5. That's an E, so I'm going to play E major, or to make it stronger, I'll play E dominant 7th, which will eventually set up the A minor. So I'm going to play 2 chord progressions. I'm going to play C right to A minor, and then I'm going to play C with the setup chord and then A minor. So this option is just going to be C to A minor. That's like target chord right to target chord. Let's see what that sounds like. C, A minor. Nothing wrong with that. It's a very easy to listen to sound. It's very soft sounding. It's very casual sounding. Now watch what happens when I sneak in that E chord, the 5 of A, right? The setup chord for the A minor. And I'm going to play E dominant 7th here. Let's see what happens there. C, E dominant, A. Notice what happened there. That E dominant 7th really set up that A because we now have some half-step movements moving us to the root of the A minor. It's setting it up in the same way that G7, dominant 7th, was setting up the C earlier, right? And how do we find it? The same way. We have our target chord, A minor. We go to its 5, E in this case, play major or dominant 7th, and then eventually move to the target chord of A minor. So you're probably noticing 2 things. Number 1, you're probably thinking, I've heard that before, and I guarantee you have because it's insanely common. It's used in all genres of music, 100%. But the other thing you're probably noticing is E dominant 7th, that's not in the key. And you're correct. E dominant 7th or even E major is not in the key of C. How do I know that? Because in the key of C, if C is 1, E is 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 chords are not major or dominant 7th. They are minor. That's what 3 chords normally are. So let's see what happens when we play that instead. Instead of playing the major or dominant 7th E, I'm going to play the minor E, the one that naturally exists in the key. Everything is going to be in the key here. Let's see what that sounds like. C, E minor, A minor. Again, nothing wrong with that. But there's not really much of a pull. There's not really much of a setup moving from that E minor to the A minor, the E minor to the 6, our target chord. Why? Because we don't have that half step move up to the root of the A. Where does that half step root come from? It comes from the major third of the setup chord. If we're playing minor, there is no major third. We have a minor third. If we want that half step move, we need this note, the note that makes this chord major and that moves up a half step to our eventual target chord, the A minor. So even though the chord is not in the key, we're still going to play it. We don't care that it's not in the key. The fact that it's not in the key doesn't matter because the priority here is to set up the A minor. And if that means we play a chord that's not in the key, who cares? The point is to set up the chord. And to be honest, the fact that the E7 or the E major is not in the key actually makes the setup even stronger because it really requires your ear to kind of notice what's going on because there's a note that's straight up not in the key. There's a note that we've never played before, right? If this is the first time we've heard the sound, we haven't heard that note. What is that note? It's the G sharp, right? Here's E minor. It's 1 in flat 3. That's G naturally occurring in the key. But when we make it major or dominant 7th to really bring out that setup sound to make it a true 5 of, we need to play G sharp because that's the note that naturally moves to the A like I just did earlier. There it is up in the higher octave. So the chord needs to be major or dominant 7th to really have that pull that we're talking about. And the fact that it's in the key doesn't matter as long as we know what the point of that chord is, as long as we know that we are using that chord as a setup. Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate this by playing a bunch of chords in a key, all target chords I would consider. So I'm going to do this in the key of C. I'm going to play a 1, 6, 4, and then 1. So let me first just play that by itself. So 1 is C, right? 6 is A minor. 4 is F. Back to C for the 1. There we go. Insanely common. I guarantee you've heard that thousands of times. Notice it's very easy to listen to, right? It's not, the chords aren't really requiring me to really pay attention to that, right? It's very casual. That can just play and I'll just casually listen to it kind of passively. That's like riding on like a lazy river. You're just like cruising around, kind of letting the music take you. It doesn't really require your attention, right? You're just playing the chords. Again, that's not a bad thing. Maybe that's exactly what you want in your tune. And if that's exactly what you want, then do that, right? But let's experiment with adding in setup chords before each chord. And I'm simply going to play the 5 of each chord before I play it. So I'm going to start with C. Instead of going right to A minor, the 6th chord, I'm going to play the 5 of that chord, the 5 of the 6th chord. That's the one we just figured out earlier. A minor, what's its 5? E. So I'm going to play E dominant 7th to give it some extra strength before I hit the A minor. And then the F chord, the 4 chord, I'm going to play its 5. What would its 5 be? Again, here's the root of the F, go up a power chord, whatever note that is, C in this case, play major or dominant 7th. Again, I'm going to play dominant 7th to really beef up that setup sound. Right? So now I'm going to play the whole progression. Here it is one more time. Normal, C, A minor, F, back to C. Again, very normal. Same exact thing with all the setups. C, set up to A minor, set up to F, F, set up to C. Let me play those a little slower so you can really hear what they sound like. C, set up to A minor, E7, right? A minor. The setup to F, C7, right? The 5 of F, then F, then to get back to the C, the normal 5 of the chord, back to C. So notice what that sound does. It's a lot more colorful. It's a lot more moving. It kind of requires you to pay more attention because we're playing a lot of notes that are not in the key, right? We're playing E dominant 7th. The chord's not in the key of C, right? We're playing C dominant 7th. That chord's not in the key, right? So we have all these chords that aren't in the key, which kind of makes your eyebrows go up, kind of your ears perk whenever you hear those sounds because they're new, they're different. And because they're new and different, and because of the nature of the dominant 7th, the setup moving into the related target chords is always going to be really strong. So that's like, if the other one was like on a lazy river, that one's like, you're on a lazy river, but once in a while there's like a jet that like pushes you this way and kind of think, whoa, what was that? You know, it's not necessarily like drastically different, but it does require a little more attention. It's not so passive. You're kind of now actively listening to where the music is taking you. And it's largely due to these chords. So what I'm not saying is this is a better sound, right? It's just different. If you use these setup chords, you're not going to all of a sudden make your chord progression just simply better. It's different. You have to decide for yourself whether that sound is appropriate or not, but always be aware of what it is. Because if you're writing music and you want to, put some kind of a build or put some more emphasis or set up a chord, this is a great way to do it. Or if you're already playing an existing song and you hear a chord that is not in the key, if you're reading a chart and you see, you're in the key of C and then all of a sudden you see E7, right? Instead of looking at that as like, okay, I guess they're just playing E7. No, look at that chord and say, oh, look, it's E7 and then the next chord's A minor. That makes perfect sense because E7 is the 5 of A minor. So it's just being used as a setup chord. So you'll understand what's going on a lot better, which will mean that you'll be able to create more with it or improvise over it because you know what's going on. So again, what's this whole concept here? If we have a target chord, regardless of what the chord is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, any chord in the key, all we do, if you want to set it up, is you look at that target chord, go to its 5, on that note, play major or dominant 7th. Preferably dominant 7th, because that's always going to give you that stronger sound. Now, are there stronger sounds than dominant 7th? 100% yes, but we're not really going to talk about them just yet, but we will definitely talk about them in the future. Okay, so with that in mind, there's one more thing we need to talk about to really solidify what it is that we're doing here. Notice I've had some 5 of chords going to minor, and I've had some 5 of chords going to major, like in that progression. I had C, and then I had the E7, which was the 5 of A minor, so it's a 5 of a minor chord. And then I had the C7, which is the 5 of the F major, so that's a 5 of a major chord. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to expand on these sounds. We're going to go through as many different kind of additions or add-ons to these chords to get some really cool, thicker sounds. But we have to realize that when you work with this 5 of concept, the stuff that you will do as a 5 of going to major is not necessarily what you will do if you're playing a 5 of going to minor. Okay, so there will be some different concepts depending on what path you're taking. Are you going to a major chord, or are you going to a minor chord? It will be slightly different. For this video, because the track that we're about to get into is only major, we're only going to major chords, we're going to focus on playing 5 of major chords, and in the future, we'll talk about how to play 5 of minor chords. So let's get on to what those differences are. So now that we understand what this concept is, let's see how we can move further or expand more into the sounds to get some really cool different kind of melodic choices or cool chord voicings or whatnot. It's really, really easy. We know our template of this 5 chord, this setup chord, is dominant 7th, right? All we need to do if we want to add some more stuff to it is just think, what other notes do we have available? What other notes are we not playing, right? Well, what are the notes that we have available? All of the notes, the entire suite of notes that we can play over a 5 chord. Well, we already know we can play 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, because those are the notes that are literally in a dominant 7th chord, the chord we've been talking about this whole time. What about some of the other notes, right? Well, I have a normal 2. How do I know that? Because 2 is A, that's in the key of C that we're in, right? So I can play 1, 2, 3, so all of those notes are possible. I can also play a 4. Why do I know that? Or how do I know that? Because 4 is C, that's the root of the key. That note is in the key. So maybe I can add in a 4 to my chord. What else do I have? On 5, of course, I already have that one. I have a normal 6 as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's E in the key, right? That's the 3rd of the key. We're in the key of C, so 1, 2, 3. That note is available for us to play. And then we have, of course, the flat 7. So what is our full list or our full suite of notes that we have available when we are thinking about a 5 chord? A dominant 7th, right, in this case. So we have a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and 1. That is always the sound, always the group of notes associated with a dominant 7th. In particular, a dominant 7th moving to a major chord. Like I mentioned earlier, when we do this kind of thing, trying to build out all of the notes we have available, but move to a minor chord, it is not the same. And we will get there in a different video. So now that we know that, I can just start adding in these notes to the chord, see what happens. I'll try that. So first, let me play like a template G dominant 7th that I can use. Remember, this is the 5 of C, the chord that we're using. So here's the dominant seventh I'm going to use. So this is G dominant seventh, G7. Okay, so that's our 1, 5, flat 7, 3, 5, and then 1. Looks like this. Very, very common shape. Kind of looks like the plain bar chord, but again, we're lifting up the pinky, which reveals this note, the F, the flat 7, making this chord a dominant seventh, right? Pretty simple. So now that I have this template, let's just start adding in notes. So 2 was one of the notes. 1, 2, that would be an A. That was one of the notes that I wasn't playing. Let's add that note, see what happens. Where's the 2? Really easy. A whole step up from 1. It always is. Where's 1? I'll have 1 up top. I have 3 1s, or I have 2 1s in this chord. I have 1 here and 1 right there. I don't need both of them, so I'll keep the low root and I'll move that top root up a whole step to play 2. So now the chord looks like this. Instead of this, I'm going to take my pinky, put this note right there, high E string, 5th fret, adding in the 2 of the chord. That's A. We'll see what that sounds like. Pretty cool sound. Here's the normal. Here it is with the 2 on top. Pretty cool. Here's some other ways that we can play that. So how about this? If I play my root here, right? I play my flat 7 right there, play the 2 here. That's the same note, right? As the 2 I just added up top, just down an octave. And then I'll play the open B string for the 3. Check this out. Right? It has the same general sound, just a little thicker. Let's see what happens when we play that chord and then resolve to a C chord, our target chord. Here's the 5 of C with a 2 in this case, and then finally C. Again. Pretty cool sound, right? It's very similar to the normal dominant seventh, except it's a little thicker because we have a new note. We now have a 2 being added to the chord. The common term for this would be a 9 chord. This would be generally heard as G9. And the reason why they say 9 musically is the same exact letter and pitch as 2. So they just say 9 for whatever reason, mostly because that note is usually in a higher octave. So they'll do that. Or we're usually stacking up notes like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, like that. I don't personally think about it like that. I think it's dumb, but you can think about it however you want. I think about that as just strictly a G dominant seventh with a 2, because that's all it is. Where you play the 2 is completely up to you. Hey, that rhymed. Look at that. So now the other note that we have available that we're not playing, or one of the other notes, is the 6. Okay, so where's 6? Let's try to add that into our chord and see what happens to the sound. So where's 6? Very easy. Simply up a whole step from 5. Where's 5? I've got a bunch of 5s in here. So I've got 1 here and I've got 1 here on the B string. So the B string is going to be very easy to move up a whole step because I'm playing it right there. I could just move up a whole step with my pinky, right? Still got the 5 down here. So now I've got 1, 5, flat 7, 3, and then the 6, and then a 1 up top. So listen what this sounds like. Play that a little better. Here we go. Very thick sound. It's very dense sounding, and probably of all of them, it's probably the most dissonant, mostly because we have a flat 7 and a 6 happening at the same time, which if we play just those 2 notes, it creates that, like a note and then the same note up an octave but back a fret. So a little bit of that half-step dissonant sort of kind of deal, just displaced by an octave. So again, normal, dominant 7 with a 6. The normal turn that most people will use is a 13, but again, I don't really think about it like that. Now, how about this? If I take my pinky, flatten it, like by doing that, it looks like I'm just broke my pinky in half. I can play the 6 and the 2 at the same time, because that's the 2, that's the 6. I can do that. Why? Because I know those notes naturally exist in the sound. I can play them however I want, right? Super thick sound might be a little uncomfortable, but guess what? If you're playing with a band, surely someone is playing the root and probably the 5 as well. So you can even just do this. Right? That's the G7, even though I'm not playing the 1 or the 5. I'm only playing the flat 7, 3, the 6, and the 2. But I don't care, because I know in a musical context, someone is bound to be playing the root. Right, so I don't have to worry about kind of getting every single note in there. I can just play these small chord shapes. That's often a really great place for the guitar to sit in a band, by playing these smaller, kind of upper, more fancy notes of the chord. Okay, notice what we've done so far. We've played a dominant 7th, we've added in a 2, one of the other notes available, we've added in the 6, another note that's available, and then we even added in both of them, right? Mix the 2 and the 6, and of course you can do as many combinations as you want. Now, the one thing that's happening there is it's generally all the same sound. It sounds like G dominant 7th, just a little bit of extra spice sprinkled on top, either with the 2 or the 6 or both, right? But it's generally the same sound. It functions in a very, very similar way. Now, the note that we have not talked about is the 4, okay? This note is going to impact the chord in a different way that kind of is almost like, instead of dominant 7th, it's like a subcategory of dominant 7th that people use called suspended, okay? So let me talk about what this is. Here's the normal dominant 7th chord, right? Here's the 3, an extremely common thing that people will do when they play dominant 7th moving to a major chord is they will play what's called a suspended 4 or suspended chord. What is that? A suspended chord is when you play a chord that's usually dominant 7th, but it could be normal major, and they will get rid of the 3rd and play either the 2 or the 4. So if you play a chord that does not have a 3 but has a 2, that will be called a suspended 2. But if you play a chord that doesn't have a 3 but has a 4, that's called suspended 4. Most of the time when people play these, they do the suspended 4 option because it is stronger because of the nature of the 4. The 4 is just a stronger note in this case. Let's see what that sounds like. Here's the G dominant 7th. Here is the G with a 4 instead of the 3. Check it out. Right? So notice what this would sound like moving to our eventual target chord. Here's the normal dominant 7th, moving to the C. Here's the suspended G, moving to the C. It's kind of cool because we're playing the root of the next chord. We're like foreshadowing what that sound will be. Instead of this, bottom, we have this. Bum, then eventually here. Bum. Some people will do both. They'll mix and match. They'll play the suspended, then the normal dominant, and then the 1, the eventual target chord, okay? So that is a very common sound, and I would consider that to be a different thing. It is part of the dominant 7th family, but the sound is different enough to the point where you have to notice it, and you'll probably play a little bit differently over that sound than you would a plain dominant 7th. There's one other type of chord that is unbelievably popular, and you have to know what it is. It's used in R&B, it's used in jazz, it's used a ton in gospel music, it's used a ton in Broadway, like musicals, all the time. And it's this combination of notes. It is a 1 of the 5 chord, right? Still on the setup chord. The flat 7, right? Dominant 7th, normal. The 2 and the 4. So it's like here's the 3, right? Instead of getting rid of the 3 and playing the 4, or getting the re and playing the 2, getting rid of the 3, and playing the 2, we're getting rid of the 3 and playing both the 4 and the 2. So it's like a super suspended chord, I guess you can call it. And what the shape is, check it out. Again, root, flat 7, 2, and then 4 of this chord. Listen to this sound. I'm sure you've heard this before. Insanely common. It's actually the first chord of Treasure by Bruno Mars. So if you want to listen to what this sounds like, look up Treasure by Bruno Mars. That's the first chord. Not G, it's a different chord, but it's the same idea. Okay? Now the reason why this is so strong is because we have 2 sounds happening that are both strong. We of course have a G, right? The root of the 5 chord. But if I play this chord without the G right there, look at what I have right here. That's a literal F chord, right? That's the 4 chord of the key. So it's like I'm playing an F with a G in the bass. So you'll see those chords very often. You'll see F/G. That's what that is. It's like a super suspended dominant 7th chord. So often people will play that and then eventually move to the normal dominant like this, right? That's me lifting my pointer finger, revealing the 3rd of the chord, which allows me to resolve naturally. It's insanely common, and it's one of the most common ways to move to a major chord if your target chord is major. Again, like I mentioned earlier, can you do this moving to minor? Yes, but it's nowhere near as common, and we'll talk about why down the road. So those are the 2 sounds that I really want you to think about. Those are also the 2 sounds happening in this backing track. The most of the time when you see the dominant 7th chords happening in here, it's not just going to be plain dominant 7th. You'll often move from a suspended type dominant 7th, then to the normal dominant 7th, and then to the target chord, right? So you need to keep that in mind. You have like different families of dominant 7ths going on, and all of it is due really to the 4 of the key. The 4 of the key, or the 4 of the chord, is the thing that's making these sounds very different. So with all of that in mind, let's finally get on to what this track is doing and what we can play and think about while we're playing. So this track is pretty slow and every chord lasts for 2 bars. So you'll have a lot of time to get settled in each sound. And the track's going to move like this. We play A major, then we play A dominant 7. Then we play D, and then D dominant 7. And then G, and then G dominant 7, and then C dominant 7, then F dominant 7, then B flat dominant 7, etc. So you probably see what's going on. What we are doing is playing a major chord, right? Plain old major chord. Then that turns into a dominant 7, which is the setup chord of the next major chord, the next target chord. So in this case, that would be A7 is the 5 of D. We play that. Then that turns into a dominant 7th, which is the 5 of the next target chord, which would be G. Then we play G dominant 7, which is the 5 of the next target chord, C in this case. And we work through all of the chords like that. With this track, the way it moves, you'll eventually play every single 5 of every major chord that exists. So you're going to hit them all in this track. So the first thing I would do when you're practicing this is just simply playing the normal chords. So when you're playing over the straight up major chord, the target chord, you can play major, you can experiment with any other added tone like major with a 6, major with a 7, with a 2, all of that stuff will generally work over those chords. And then when the dominant comes, play dominant, but also be aware that you can add in some of those extra notes for the dominant sound as well. You can add in dominant with a 2, dominant with a 6, maybe sometimes the track will play one of the suspended variations. So that's dominant with a 4 or without a 3 with a 4 instead. Those types of sounds will be happening. I actually specifically did not write down when they are happening in the track because I want you to use your ear to hear them and adapt while you're playing. I think it's really important for you to be able to hear these nuances, the changes of the chords, when the chord is suspended, when it's not, because if you do that, as you're going through your musical life, you'll be able to adapt and latch onto these different sounds a lot faster, and you won't have to rely on reading a chart. In my opinion, if you learn everything by reading a chart, you're actively making yourself a worse musician. You have to do things by ear. Being able to read a chart is great, but you have to be able to hear these sounds. If you don't know what these sounds sound like, you don't really know what you're doing, in my opinion. I know it's a harsh opinion. Some of you will agree with, and some of you will not, but I'm sticking to it. Anyway, let's test out some of these chords, exactly how I was talking about. And I'm going to play really, really simple chord voicings when I'm running through these. Just straight up like 1, 3, 5, maybe 1, 3, 5 with a 7. So that's like 1, 3, 7 right there. And then dominant 1, 3, flat 7, maybe sneak in a 4, right? The little suspended variation if it feels like it works, and I'll move through like that. So this starts on A. So let's check this out. I'm going to play normal A major right here, 1, 3, 5. That's it. Maybe add in little notes, right? That's the 6, or the 7 up top, dominant. Notice I knew exactly when that chord was going to change because I'm really paying attention to it. Flat 7, here comes the D, really simple. Right, major 7, here comes dominant. Here's the flat 7, right there in the chord. Turns into G right here. Plain old G, 3, 5, 1 of G. Sneak in like a 2, why not? Dominant coming up right here. Or like this. Or like this. That's me sneaking dominant with some extra of these added tones. That's the C. That's C with 2 on top. C with 7 on top. Dominant. Right, I've got the flat 7 in the bass. Maybe the 6 on top. That's the F, the 3, the 6, and the 2, kind of a fancier F, right? Why am I doing those sounds? Because I know what they are and I'm just experimenting with them to see how they affect the sound. So that's using chords. Now let's talk about experimenting with playing single notes, playing melodies over this. So the easiest thing that you can do when you're playing through a change like this is having notes that are always going to connect in a specific way the entire time. And there's one way that's really easy. So when you're playing the major chord, target in the chord the root. So if that's A, here's A up top. So I'm going to target this note, and I'm also going to kind of dance around between that and the normal 7. Because both of those notes will generally work over this track when it's a plain major chord, right? Then when the chord turns to dominant, guess what? That dominant 7th, the flat 7, that's the different note between major and dominant 7. It's right where I am, right? If that's 1, that's normal 7. Flat 7 is just back 1 more fret, from that 7. So that main color note is right where I already am, right where I'm already looking. So I can get it really easily. And then guess what? According to what we figured out earlier when we were initially talking about the setup sound, remember where that flat 7 moved? When I was playing like C and G, so there's the C, there's the setup chord, there's the C. Remember that top note moved up half step. Then when we added in this note, the flat 7 of the G, where did that go? Back a fret to the 3rd of our eventual target chord. So the flat 7 of the setup chord moves back 1 fret to the 3rd of the target chord. Well, guess what? In the lead, it's going to be exactly the same. If this is my flat 7 of A, which it is, guess where it's going to go when I resolve to D? Back a fret. That takes me to the 3rd of D. And if this is the 3rd of D, I can maneuver until I find the 1, right? Easy, just walk down the scale. 3, 2, 1, there it is. Now that's the root. I can play root, normal 7, and guess what I'm going to do? Back another fret to the flat 7 when the chord changes, and then back another fret to the 3 when the eventual next target chord happens. So notice it's that same motion. Root, normal 7, flat 7, 3rd, right? Then you find another root. Root, normal 7, flat 7, 3rd of the next chord. Find another root. Root, normal 7, flat 7, 3rd of the next chord. It's going to move like that every time. So watch as I do this. I'm just going to play the notes. I'm not really going to play much, just going to play them. Here's the A. Normal 7. Flat 7, right? Just back a fret from where the normal 7 was. Back 1 more fret to the 3rd of the D. Now I'm on D. That's the root. Back to the flat 7. There it is, D7. Back a fret, watch this. Now I'm on the 3rd of G, right? That's the root of G, 7 of G. Flat 7 right there. Because the chord changed. Flat 7, bring it back a fret. Now I'm on the 3rd of C. Get ready for the flat 7. Right? Flat 7 again. Back a fret. 3rd of F. Right? So you see kind of how I'm moving through. Even though I am playing more, I'm doing more like little notey things around, I'm still targeting those notes in my plan, in my lines. If you want to just sit on the note and just casually move down like that just to really get the sound in, by all means do that. But start to experiment, start to branch out in your playing, but still have those notes as your focus notes, because those are the notes that you can use to guide you through all of the chord progressions. Let me just do that one more time. I'm just going to play a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to start the track over, and we'll do it again. Here's the A. Same thing. Here we go. The G. Flat 7 coming up. 3rd of the C, etc. So even though I'm doing more, I'm playing more notes, I'm still looking for those notes as like waypoints so I know where the next chord, or I know what to play over the next chord. Like if I'm playing a 5 of, all I need to do is look for that flat 7 because I know that note will simply move back a fret and now I'm on the 3 of the next chord. It's an easy way for you to kind of keep track of what's going on and move through the changes seamlessly and smoothly. So that's pretty much it for this lesson. I'll probably visit this sort of topic again down the road because it's insanely common. Even though we're doing it right here in like a hip hop style, you will hear this in all genres 100%. Doesn't even matter what the genre is. Death metal, you're going to hear it. In classical music, you're obviously going to hear it. EDM, funk, R&B, country, you will hear this concept. I guarantee it. You just have to be aware of when it happens and adapt accordingly. So hopefully all this stuff makes sense. I'll see you guys in the next one.